Well, it's October the 23rd, and so the numbers are in. I guess based on the Epoch Times numbers, there's a little conflict between that and Fox News. There was 1,666,000 and some odd illegal immigrants that managed to get in the country, according to the Border Patrol count that were, I guess, that they encountered, and there was another nearly 300,000, like 290,000, that were tried to get in without papers. I presume they were turned back. I guess they didn't know the magic words to say, or they were unaccompanied males or females, I guess, but either way, that didn't have children. And so that's the results for fiscal 2021, and I presume that the situation promises that next fiscal year will even be greater, because after all, the tail end of the Trump policies are included in that, if we recall, which starts at the beginning of October. So the tail end of last year is also included in, So, at any rate, so we can figure it'll be worse next year. I originally had estimated some time back that there'd be at least 6 million illegal immigrants getting in the country during the Biden years. It looks like I may have been optimistic, but and this is largely due to the, of course, the failed Biden policies, and also some absolutely asinine laws and procedures we have on this subject. I mean, and I think also the administration's failure to enforce the laws mostly that we already have. However, even if fully enforced, they're really mixed up. I mean, the policy which actually encourages people to grab hold of a child, maybe theirs, maybe not, and come, and that gets you in the country. I mean, I think that is a really absurd policy, because who knows how many kidnapped children are involved in this whole thing, or how many children are being sent up and then sent back and then sent back again, or there's a lot of illegal cartel activity going on in this whole process. Plus, this doesn't include all what they call the gotaways, the people that obviously don't want to get captured. And, of course, that would include smugglers and, I guess, people that simply wouldn't be given amnesty anyhow and know that they need to get away. So that's a mixture of trouble also. Bottom line is we have a completely out of control border situation, and it's only a matter of time before terrorists are going to utilize the situation and get in the country that way and perpetrate some sort of a terroristic attack. I think it's amazing it hasn't even happened already, but I guess with the fall of Afghanistan and the Taliban in control, it would look like that things are already moving in those directions. But we don't know when or how. After all, it takes these guys some time to get their plot together, but we can expect the worst coming down the road. Anyway, if you like these videos, remember, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. Give me a like, which helps out with the algorithm, and any comments are appreciated. I don't have as many comments as we might like sometimes. Discussion. Anyway, let's, I think the main thing that's missing in a lot of the discussion on this is the lack of the big picture. I mean, after all, we're in a world with, about approaching 8 billion people in it now, and you have, well, let's say, what's used to be called, the first world countries, U.S., well, they're not going to be immigrating here, they're already here. You don't have a whole lot of illegal Canadian immigrants, you have some legal ones. But basically Europe and Japan and so forth, and China even, I think, if nothing else, the political difficulties, I think most of the Chinese are probably coming over as students, and some of them overstaying their visas and that sort. And there are other instances which we've seen, of course, too, where they come in various ways. But mostly, I think we're talking about the rest of the world. Other than that, you've got, literally billions of people who are living in economic conditions considerably lower than the United States. And so it looks to me like there's an endless supply of potential illegal immigrants. And now that what we're seeing at the southern border, that this is no longer just a case of people from Mexico or Central America coming in, although there's plenty of them. They're coming in from all over the place. I mean, from Africa, from South America. I mean, it's only a matter of time. Other places, Middle East, and so forth. And so, like I said, there's an almost endless supply. And the question I kind of raise is, what level do we want the population to grow to? I mean, nobody's actually looking at it in this sort of terms, but I mean, if we have a census account of 330 million people, and who knows how many illegals have been missed in that census. I mean, technically they're not excluded, but do illegal immigrants typically answer the census? Well, probably not. So, and the question really again is, as the country becomes more and more crowded, as housing becomes more and more expensive, there is a real question of just how many people we want to bring in here. And it seems like nobody's discussing this subject in that sort of way, hardly. And so I think this is something that needs to be raised in the discussion going forward, is what's the goal of all this? I mean, this open borders thing is obviously, at the moment, an attempt by the Democrat Party, I think, to eventually load the system up for future potential Democrats. Because at some point, there will probably be some kind of amnesty. And even if there isn't, these people will have children once they're here. And according to some rather absurd laws we have, those children automatically become citizens. I mean, while this might have been a reasonable decision in the late 19th century, in the modern world, with travel the way it is, I think that's just an absurd policy. I mean, I think there ought to be something more to it than simply an illegal immigrant having a child. If you say a person is here under legal status having a child, and that person becoming an automatic citizen, that makes sense. Or children of citizens make sense. Even children of permanent residents make sense. But just because you're here, I mean, in many instances, I mean, if a woman is traveling and happens to give birth in the country, maybe unplanned, the child would theoretically be granted citizenship, even though they're perhaps totally loyal citizens of some other country and actually go back there. So, I mean, I think this whole policy is really outdated and really needs to be reformed, but there's another problem. You know, the system such as it is makes it very difficult, with the Democrats obviously not at all interested in making a reform. Some things could be done by a Supreme Court decision if the right one was made, because, I mean, I think a lot of this has to do with the interpretation of the 14th Amendment, and there are ways that could be finessed. But nobody's done that in well over 130 or 40 years here. So at any rate, I just thought I'd kind of raise that issue. That's kind of one of the pressing developments that occurred, and the number was finally announced. On to other topics. Well, another week has passed, and no real word on the exact state of negotiations with the Democrats in the Senate over the big so-called Build Back Better bill that the Democrats are promoting. It appears at the moment there's a lot of negotiation with Senator Manchin and the more progressives, as they call themselves, on the issue. And numbers have been I've heard numbers like 1.5 trillion on his side, or something like 2 trillion on their side, and I've also seen the number 1.75 trillion, 1.75. Of course, the devil's in the details is how you calculate that. As I pointed out before, that's the real issue. I mean, if you start a program and fund it that's meant to be an ongoing, and like, for instance, a free junior college. Well, if that program started, but it's only funded in the bill for 4 years, do we think that's going to end after 4 years, or what? I mean, so really these calculations need to be based on the 10-year budget cycle, which is what these things are typically programmed on, to have any real clarity in what we're talking about. And now I'm hearing that there's a lot of fighting over the corporate income tax increases. I've even heard to the point of, at one point Manchin was saying he would go no higher than 25%. Now I'm hearing maybe they're going to drop it totally. But the point is that these tax increases that they're talking about won't generate the revenue they're projected to, because they're all based on a static model of behavior, which of course won't really, once the increases go in place, the accountants and corporations and wealthy people will go into work to figure out some way to reprogram what they're doing. And after a year or two, a lot of these taxes probably won't roll in as fast as they originally were planned to be. Plus, there's an effort on the part of certain factions to reinstate large-scale deductions for state and local taxes, because it's kind of hit people in high-tax states pretty hard. And so that's another little issue that's played around in here. I'd always point out that everybody talked about that tax cut for the rich, thing, if we remember, that the Democrats always threw out. But the reduction of the top rate from 39.6 to 37 was actually a compensation for losing the state income tax deduction. I mean, it might have been said that way, but for the people in those top income groups, if you're in a state with an average state income tax of 6%, you'll see that that reduction pretty much just compensates for the loss of that tax deduction. So with all the whining we've been hearing from people from New York, really, they were kind of being taken care of, although they weren't very being forthcoming about that, were they? It wasn't quite the windfall that was being portrayed by the media, was it? So, of course, I'm not in that income group, but I do look at what the numbers are, and I'm just saying that was a lot of nonsense, like a lot of the things you actually hear out there on TV. So we don't know what the Democrats are going to end up doing. As I've said before, I'm very pessimistic that they don't come to some agreement eventually. It would be nice if the whole thing does collapse, but I'm a little bit cautious about thinking it will. It depends a little bit on what the real motivations of people like Manchin and Sinema really are, and who else may or may not be supporting them. Nobody else seems to be publicly, although I'm still suspicious that it's just those two, but who knows. So at any rate, but the one last thing it looks to me on this, on that topic, and I've hit this before, isn't it looking a little bit more like I was right about the idea of doing the debt limit increase? We've avoided a crisis. The filibuster is still intact. In fact, it was just used last week to block another Democrat attempt to take over voting nationwide. It was blocked by a filibuster. However, I'd also point out that Schumer voted no, and what that means is it gives him the right to bring the bill up again. So they haven't necessarily given up completely on that, have they? And so that's a thing that's sort of still sitting out there for them to deal with. But a warning I have on this is if you force the Democrats to use reconciliation to raise the debt limit, which they can, I don't think it's just going to be a single bill. We raise the debt limit in the reconciliation bill, but we don't do anything else. I think that there's going to be something else in it, and it'll probably be worse than what might happen if we go ahead and allow the debt limits to increase and focus on cutting the spending. Because I don't think the debt limit is, I think that's a kind of a sledgehammer way to deal with the situations I pointed out in previous videos. Not the best way to handle it. And so, but I think that it shows to me right now that McConnell, as I said in one of my previous videos, really did the right thing and handled it very well. And the people that wanted a big confrontation were completely wrong, because right now the confrontation is more Democrat on Democrat. And that's a good thing. So anyhow, I'll kind of wrap this up for now. Like I say, I'll put some links to things below, maybe one of the previous videos, and then we'll that addresses the issue there on what I said about the debt limit and so forth previously. I also have links below to my social media. I do post quite frequently on Twitter, and we'll wrap this up for now until next time.